Feel like I tell somebody, once or twice a week at least, that I was homeschooled from kindergarten through college. It's not the only explanation for my social awkwardness. It may not even be the most important one, but it is, I think, the most exculpatory. So I'll mention it again here. This is Library Pizza, a podcast about reading. My name is Mike Meginnis. I did know a few other homeschool kids back in the day, but as a general matter, they aren't the sort of people I would choose to hang out with now, though I do still feel some love for them from afar. Most of my socialization took place online through chat rooms, ICQ, AOL Instant Messenger, forums, and eventually blogs. It was through blogging as a deeply stupid teenager that I met Ned Resnikoff, an analyst, researcher, journalist, and consultant with a particular focus on housing and urban policy, though I suppose at the time he was mainly probably a student. When I met him in person, I think I was about 23 at the time, he endeared himself to me forever by telling me I was less scary than he'd expected. I was an extremely angry 23-year-old. And honestly, people did find me scary. So it was nice that somebody didn't. We used to talk about books now and then, and so I thought it would be fun to pick that conversation up again and have, after a fashion, a sort of miniature high school reunion. I should mention that Ned writes a newsletter, Public Comment, which I enjoy reading, and that he is currently writing a book titled Cities for the People, which you can learn more about at his Blue Sky account. I'll link all of that in the show notes. I'll see you on the other side of my very dignified theme music. So the other thing about the format is I will, as you've heard, I'll record an introduction after the fact, and I'll just put that at the beginning so the listener will know who you are, and we don't have to go through the weird thing of you introducing yourself to an invisible person before we start talking. So we can just have a conversation, then at some point the podcast starts, which I'm told when I first said that to somebody, I thought that was going to be like a relaxing, like, oh yeah, sure, well, it'll just happen naturally. What they said was, that's the scariest thing I've ever heard. And I understood why when I played it back in my head. Like, oh yeah, at some point the podcast starts. I guess unexpected, like stochastic surveillance is not relaxing.
You'd think we'd be used to it by now.
Yeah. I mean, I feel basically used to it myself, but in a way where like I'm just used to living with a certain level of ambient dread, right? The place where I wanted to start is talking about you've got a kid, which I don't. And that's like the big difference between us. There aren't any others that I can think of.
Wait, so has the stochastic surveillance started now? Is this the...
Yes.
Are we in the podcast? Okay,
we are
great.
Probably in the podcast.
I will get back into my sort of like paranoid I'm being listened to stance. Okay. Good.
So you recently had a daughter, if memory serves, and I think if I've got the timeline right, she's approaching a year, but she's not quite there.
Yeah.
I think the main thing, because I decided ages ago I wasn't going to have kids, but I think like the main thing that I miss when I imagine what the experience would be, apart from like not sleeping or having money, is the idea of reading to them, the idea of getting to choose like what their first few books would be before they would have that opportunity. And then also trying to like subtly manipulate their life in the media environment that they experience before they're ready to launch, so that they cultivate a habit. And so I'm curious, like, where are you in that process right now? How's your planning going? How's the implementation?
Well, so my daughter's 10 months old, which, this is going to sound insulting, but she's functionally illiterate. I mean, she basically can't read at all. I mean, she hasn't said her first words yet or anything. So, I mean, we've got a bunch of books for her, some of which were given to us and some of which we bought. And most of them are like the board books with the kind of thick cardboard pages. Every once in a while, I'll try to read one to her just because I kind of like the ritual. And because, I mean, the great advantage of reading to her right now is that when I'm doing it, she is stuck in my lap, so she's not trying to she's not like wandering around the kitchen trying to murder herself. And I think she likes, she likes the sound of my voice and my wife's voice, and she likes the books themselves because they're colorful, and she especially likes them because she can bite them. So that's like her main engagement with books right now, is that she loves to I'll start reading her like a page of something, and then immediately she'll just kind of like grab the book out of my hand and start gnawing on it. And that's, I mean, I think honestly, I think that's good because I think like at this stage, like the most we can ask for is for her to associate books with something pleasant or fun. And then hopefully she's like building that association later on, where once she understands what words are, she'll start to like books for that reason. I mean, the other thing she does is, I've got my bookshelf behind me, and she'll just come in here and start kind of like pulling all the books off the shelf. And again, that's like I have to kind of monitor her to make sure that she doesn't actually destroy any of these books or like rip the cover off or anything. But the fact that she's just kind of interacting with them in a tactile way, I think right now is probably a good sign for later.
I think it's okay to say that your 10-month-old daughter is illiterate at this point. I feel like that's pretty standard, although I am not like thoroughly versed in the developmental stages. So I don't think it'll hurt her feelings in the future when you sit down and listen to this podcast with her, as I'm sure you will.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to podcasts yet. I don't know how we're going to ease her into that.
It's a tough conversation to have with your kids. And you didn't used to have to do it. It used to be you just had to explain like gay people on Dancing with the Stars. Mm-hmm. But now there's also podcasts. Do you find yourself, when you are choosing which board books to give her, are you looking for tastiness? Is that part of your strategy?
Yeah, just trying to get as many scratch and sniff ones as I possibly can. I mean, honestly, like the main board books that we really like right now there's this children's author called Sandra Boynton, who I think has been doing these books for like 40 plus years at this point. And those books are great because they're super colorful and kind of fun. Like the art I like it. I think it looks cool. And I think like for babies, it's the kind of thing that they like too. And the thing that's really nice about it is that the books are just silly. Like I've kind of developed an aversion to these children's books that are kind of saccharine in a way that it's like they're trying to impart a lesson to the kid. I think books that are just kind of straight up goofy and fun, especially for like really little kids, are way better because it's just like you're meeting them where they're at, which is that they want something playful and silly.
I have like 2 or 3 formative children's books that I do remember. Sadly, I can't go as far back as board books, although that would be impressive. So like one big one for me that I go back to all the time, like genuinely I think about this when I'm writing fiction, is there's a monster at the end of this book. Mm-hmm. So the setup for the listener, if the listener is unfamiliar, we've got Grover hanging out with the reader of the book. He is begging them not to go to the end of the book because it says the name is there's a monster at the end of this book, and he's really stressed out by the idea. And of course, what Grover doesn't understand is that he himself is, in our eyes, a terrifying grotesque, I guess. So he's the monster. The twist ending is he's the monster who is at the end of the book. And he spends the whole thing, just every page is him begging the kid not to turn the page, which is the genius of it because it provides the child with an interaction. If you're reading that to a kid, you can ask him like, what do you think? Should I turn the page? And then Grover says, please don't, please stop. You have to listen to me. And then he asks the kid, should I turn the page again? And you just keep going. And it is genuinely the first example I can remember in my life of experiencing like real rising tension and then cathartic release, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah, it's also like a great kind of introduction to just existential horror for the kids, like this idea that like you look in the mirror and realize all along you were the true monster. Like, I mean, it's sort of like Grover's a proto Walter White.
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, this is kind of one of my frustrations with like recent televised fiction especially, but I feel like this has been true of like mainstream entertainment generally, that in some ways like that was the best idea we had for like a decade, was like, what if it turns out that the main character is the monster at the end of the story? And it kind of feels like We did that with Tony Soprano. That was really good. And then we just like we never did better than that. We never moved on. I feel like right now we don't even know, like, what do you think is the replacement for that structure currently? If you're making a prestige TV show, what do you do instead of that? Or is it still just that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think of. I've actually been watching a bit more TV these days than I have in a while, just because there are a few good things on, and I'm trying to think like what's the thread with them, and I guess a lot of them still are kind of like male anti-hero or male straight up villain type shit. Because I don't think of Tony Soprano really as an anti-hero. Like he's a bona fide sociopath and
Right.
kind of is from the beginning of the show. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe now it's just kind of it's bifurcated back into you've got on the one hand the people who are kind of like flawed, good-hearted but masculinity in crisis type characters. And then on the other hand, I don't know if you've watched any of the Mussolini miniseries,
No.
but that's a good example of like this guy is not an anti-hero. He's not a complicated person. He's just like, the embodiment of pure evil. It's great. I highly recommend it. It's so good.
Yeah, like I'm thinking through the stuff that I've watched recently, and like some of it is already. I don't watch that much TV these days, but I think you're right. There has been more that has been interesting to me recently after a long dry spell. But like Barry was pretty good, but Barry was ultimately it was a really annoying example of that thing where the guy's a monster at the beginning and it tells you he's a monster, and then you have fun watching the show, and then it kind of wags its finger at you like, did you realize you've been enjoying a show about a monster? And it's like, yes, that was the agreement we made at the beginning of this experience, was that you would be showing me a bad person and I would be enjoying the bad person's adventures.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to me, Barry always just kind of felt like pretty good pastiche. Like it's like, do you want to see kind of like a silly but loving version of like tropes from Jean-Pierre Melville and other kind of new wave or 70s American directors, and it was good at that, but it also yeah, I think in part because of what you're saying, like there was never a point where I felt really involved in it emotionally in any sort of way.
It was formally pretty beautiful and it was structurally impressive at times and the jokes were solid, but then like especially in the last few episodes where it really went heavy on the by the way, this is in fact a drama stuff, it really lost me, and I was really frustrated by that. I feel like the other sort of strand as I'm thinking about it is I feel like we're in negotiations with ourselves culturally right now in terms of like, okay, say we wanted to feel good. Imagine a universe where we wanted to enjoy something or feel happy. That's not the one that we're in now.
That is like never why I go to fiction. I'm never like picking up a book or watching a movie being like, I just want to feel good right now.
Well, I feel like with TV you do want that though, right? Because like you're the idea is that you're going to come back next week. And so like there's a baseline level of enjoyment that is kind of in the contract with the people who made it. Although often it is that handshake of you're going to come back and see Walter White be a piece of shit next week too. Like it isn't necessarily going to have a fun time, but like it does feel like there've been some shows where they're like we don't really know what we can enjoy or what we can endorse at this point, but we've settled on like found family as sort of like a catch-all. Like if nothing else, it's good to surround yourself with a bunch of weirdos, which is, I mean, that's kind of like the Muppets. That's basically the Muppets.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like that's structurally very much a thing of American TV, where it's just like if you have a sprawling cast of characters, then you need to have some way to keep them all together, and they all. And I think this is more an American thing than it is a function of TV in general, but that means they all have to start liking each other at some point, which
yes,
I actually find really annoying. Like that was where the American version of The Office really lost me, when it was like all of a sudden all of these characters were this sort of, yeah, like you said, like a found family. It's like, I mean, they all work in the same shitty workplace together. Like some of these people should still dislike each other. They don't all need to be friends.
Yeah, there was with the British office, there was a comfort with the fact that the camera hated the people that were on camera and they hated each other. I didn't watch a lot of it, but that was like the couple episodes I saw, to me, that was like the obvious contrast, going in the reverse order where I saw the American version first, and then I saw some of the British one. And I did feel at the time frustrated by that difference. I think partly because like if anyone that I work with ever listens to this, I love you, you're great, I'm sure, but like I don't like to have personal relationships with the people that I work with at all. Like my preference is that they don't know I exist when I leave and that I don't know anything about them when they leave. And that's like just not, that's almost not allowed, right? Like if you say that to people in an office here, it feels extremely hostile, I think.
Well, especially because you're in an academic setting, right? And so I feel like that's the kind of profession where those lines especially get really blurred.
Yeah, although I work at a hospital now. I work at a hospital on that same campus that I previously worked on the more academic side of things, which does change the relationship a little bit because most of the people that I am working with directly are the support staff for the people whose job it is to like put their hands in people's guts and all that stuff. And it does, I think, create a slightly clinical atmosphere as opposed to the extremely clinical atmosphere that I assume prevails inside the clinic. And I appreciate that. I do. I like having that little bit more like I don't have to go drink with people in this office in order to feel like I'm participating in the community. And when you work in like an English department or whatever, that's like that is expected. That's what you have to do, basically.
See, I feel like that's actually one of the things that I'm kind of like a freelance consultant now and working on a book, and so I have more of like a solitary work pattern these days, but I do miss the camaraderie of like my last workplace and also before that when I was a journalist. I guess I'm maybe a little bit more comfortable or enjoy a little bit more that idea of you're working together on a shared thing, but then you're friends outside of work. It doesn't have to happen, and it feels very weird when people try to force that on an entire workplace unnaturally. But I think it is nice because especially if you're in a field where it's something that you think about a lot outside of work, then it's nice to have people to talk to who kind of have seen the same things you've seen and are thinking about the same things.
One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was a piece that you wrote. Let's see, what was the date on this? This was November 11th, 2024. So the listener immediately knows a lot about what was happening in that moment and how it felt. And I'll tell you, like, to summarize my experience of that moment, I think that was after I had decided that I was going to go ahead and do this. I went to a writing residency in South Korea with like no warning at all. And I spent like 6 weeks there. But before I could make the decision to do that, I had to wander around my house just weeping at the top of my lungs, sounding. It was a subject on the last episode of this podcast too, is me crying. And I was thinking, because I should make you talk with me about crying, because it was women on that podcast, and I feel like if I'm making women talk with me about crying, and then you're my first male guest, and I don't also make you process emotions with me, I feel like I'm failing everyone on some level. But so I'm weeping and screaming in the style of like a distraught Chewbacca around this time. And then I read this thing by you. The title was "The Party Should Throw Them a Party," and I think you probably saw me. Like, I was sharing this with people after that happened. Like on Blue Sky, I was sharing this article with people because it was one of the early things I saw that was like, that's kind of a model for how I can imagine not walking around my house crying like Chewbacca for the next year. So would you like to summarize that, or would you like me to summarize the argument?
I can summarize it. I mean, first, maybe I'll just tell you a little bit about what was going on in my life.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was literally published on November 11th. So I wasn't crying like Chewbacca, but that was November 11th was actually my wife's due date for that was the day that the kid was supposed to be born.
Right.
And the kid ended up actually being pretty late. But I think I had a little bit of yeah, that episode of The Simpsons where it's like the doctor is explaining to Mr. Burns that the only reason he's still alive is because all like there are so many
Yes.
diseases and bacteria that they can't get through the door
Yes, and
to.
I've seen this metaphor used to describe more and more things over the
Yeah.
last couple months. I've been seeing this over and over again.
Well, I think that's kind of where I was at emotionally because I had the election and then I had like today is the day where we could be going to the hospital at any minute, and so I just felt completely mentally fried, just totally cooked, and I think that I was just blogging a lot about the election as a way to just I mean it was very difficult to make sense of the election, but it was impossible to make sense of the fact that I was about to become a dad.
Right.
And so anyway, the piece was kind of a synthesis of a few things I've been thinking about for a while. One of it feels kind of weird that the first actual adult book I'm going to cite on this podcast is a work of political science because it's like, oh, I'm going to come on here and talk about novels. I never get to talk about novels, but there's this book by a political scientist named Theda Skocpol called Diminished Democracy that is about the sort of trajectory of American politics since the early 20th century, late 19th century, where you had all of these different all these different clubs. So people were kind of more involved in party politics at the local level, but they were also members of the Chamber of Commerce or the Elks Club or the Shriners or the Masons or whatever local group. And those local groups were sort of like an intermediary institution that both provided some social structure to the lives of the members, but also, kind of delivered political news to them and then also translated what was going on in the community and the concerns of those people in the community back to elected officials. And I think that part of the reason why we're in the situation we're in now is because we don't really have institutions that do that anymore. I mean, we have the internet, and there are still some institutions like that, mainly churches. But what my argument was that if we're going to kind of rebuild actual mass democracy, then political parties, and in particular the Democratic Party, if it's going to offer a sort of durable, plausible alternative to fascism, they need to have some way of building actual durable connections with voters. And you can't do that by just running a campaign once every couple years or once every 4 years and having the right social media strategy and everything. Like those things are important, but really what you need is something like what we used to have, where people were organized into these social clubs and community groups, and they weren't necessarily explicitly political, but there was some sense of shared values, and that created the basis for being able to mobilize those people when you actually needed them for an election or whatever. And it's not just a one-way street, right? Like they're also providing, I think, a sort of thicker and richer sense of data than you get from just like issue polling. Like we're going to interview 500 people and figure out what our immigration strategy should be. I mean, I think that's a sort of another example of why American politics both feels like so scary right now and also so slippery and insubstantial, because that is a lot of how just people tend to talk about policy issues in the sort of political realm.
When that essay came out, there were a couple others that were written at the same time that had similar ideas to them, and it did feel like there was a collective recognition that there was a need for this sense of community. And like I immediately thought about back when we were It's funny. Like, I feel like one of the symptoms of our inability to think like adults about COVID is the fact that I never know what to say anymore when I want to refer to that era, right? Because you can't say during the pandemic, because then people will accurately point out that we're still there, which is at this point a little bit, I don't know, disingenuous. We're not as there as we were, and I think pretending otherwise is counterproductive. But so what I tend to say is during lockdown, in the period where I did spend more than 8 hours a day in the basement that you're looking at now in this Zoom window. And when the vaccines were on the horizon, when we knew that they were effective and they were going to be distributed soon, I remember telling my friends on the Discord group chat that I was in, we should throw parties. As soon as we get out of here, we should throw parties with everybody. We should try and get our neighborhoods. We should try and get our cities to come out and celebrate the fact that we are now allowed to be together again and create that sense of community. And maybe we can become a little bit saner as a result of doing this. And then of course I didn't throw the parties because I'm a shy person, and like I was just telling you, like, I want to go home and be left alone. Like I do have as much as I like people individually, I do have a certain amount of misanthropy that makes it difficult for me to deal with groups. So I chickened out. But I've been feeling that again recently, and like we haven't really. I think it's fair to say at this point that the DNC did not read your essay, take its advice to heart, and attempt to follow it, in pivotal precincts or whatever. But I don't know, maybe they should have, one, and two, like it's just so hard right now because like what we're dealing with is like just this endless like assault every day. There's just like a new outrage. There's a new reason to feel scared, and people are terrified to the point where like instead of inviting people to parties, I just want to tell them like, please stop cowering. Like, if you could just stop for 1 second telling everyone that we live in Hungary now. As apparently I've read that like Orbanism is like, it's on the rocks. So instead of this eternal solution to politics by fascist rule that people are so scared of, we have what one would expect, which is like the world is going to keep turning. I have been wanting that again. And so that's part of why I started this podcast, which like it's on the internet. So that's not like a real example of that. But it was out of a desire to remind people of things that they could do outside the internet that would make them feel good. Like just like I really think at this point we are in a bizarre situation where for all our like belief that we're like really self-flagellating about how hedonistic we are. And I think we're terrible at hedonism because I think that most of the things people are spending most of their time on don't feel good to them. And like, reading does feel really good to me when I do it. Mm-hmm. And my partner Tracy recently started a thing where every Sunday we meet up at a bar with whoever wants to show up, and we just read together quietly, which is more in the spirit of the kind of thing that you're talking about. But have you had any luck? Like you did write recently about the success of happy hours as a political organizing tool.
Yeah, so for people listening to the pod who don't know anything about my background and the sort of work I do, I'm involved with the YIMBY movement, Yes in My Backyard, basically just trying to get more housing built in areas that don't have enough housing to bring down housing costs and all the other good things that come along with that, because the housing shortage creates all these other pathologies in culture and politics and the economy and everything. The piece was sort of about how the YIMBY movement has been able to win a lot of legislative fights in California and around the country. And it was especially pegged to, in California, the governor just signed this huge bill that was like a decade in the making, which I won't bore listeners with too many of the details. You can listen to some other podcasts that I go on sometime where I talk about this bill. But it allows for building more apartment buildings near major bus and rail stops in California. My argument in that piece was the real reason why the YIMBY movement is successful is because it's fun to be a part of, and people in the YIMBY movement like hanging out with each other, and they in particular, a lot of YIMBY groups host happy hours fairly regularly, and people just kind of hang out at those happy hours and bullshit about housing policy or just whatever else. But, usually housing policy, because also a lot of YIMBYs are just tremendous freaks and get interested in things like regulations about how many staircases an apartment building of a certain size is supposed to have, and what that does to housing costs and yada yada. But I think that's huge, and I think it's a big part of why SB 79 ultimately got signed, because you have all of these people who hang out with each other and know each other. And when the rumor got around that the governor was thinking about actually vetoing this bill, it like went through those networks, and everyone had spent so much time like talking to each other about this stuff and just kind of being engaged on like a social and emotional level, that it was super easy to activate all of them to go call the governor's office and ask him to sign it. So I mean, that's an example of, I mean, these sort of like building up these sort of social connections takes a lot of time. And I think that's part of the reason why it doesn't happen, because people tend to think more in the sort of like, in terms of a campaign cycle or a legislative cycle or whatever. But I think that's also why, for example, I think that's where a lot of the strength of the far right comes from, too. Because you have these like far right evangelical churches that, again, people can kind of organize not just their politics around, but also their social lives around and everything. And so it's about how do you replicate that kind of like social thickness in a way that, again, sort of makes actual politics, instead of just posting about politics, possible.
I feel like the closest analogy to this kind of thing that I have in my life is like, I don't know how long ago it was now, I've lost track of time, but when I moved to Iowa City after a couple years, I really was like, I gotta find a way to meet people. And so I got on Meetup, and I found a board game group that was hosted by a local person. And that became like my entire social circle, is people who attended that group at one time. And that is still who I talk to today. And most of the time when I'm having when I am sharing space with other human beings on purpose, rather than because I'm obligated to do so. And it's not a political organization, but as listeners of this podcast may be experiencing currently, I am annoyingly, I will advocate given any opportunity. And so people in that group who do spend time with me, they know that every now and then I'll send them an email like, hey, you're going to the protest? Let's go do it. And it's not because they asked me to do that. It's not because that's, I'm not part of the Democratic Party or, indivisible or whatever, but I feel like I love these people and I want them to have good lives. And I really feel like participating in this sort of thing is important. And so this is like my argument for the listener. Like, if you're not associating with people in this way, if you're not having that sort of in-person community that is giving you opportunities to share whatever you love and whatever makes you feel like a whole person and whatever you think is going to help other people feel whole, I think you should do it. I think you have to do it for yourself, really. All that said, when you are in your solitude, but you are you take off the work hat and you put on the relaxing and reading for your own enjoyment hat. And I do assume, what kind of hat do you think that transition is? Is that like a business hat? It's not a fedora these days, right? It's not a top hat. What would you wear hat wise for business at this point?
I mean, I don't know, because so this is a great source of frustration to me as a bald man, as a bald American, that it seems like a lot of hats have become off limits.
Yes.
They just have really toxic cultural associations with them. And so I've basically become very limited, but I need to wear hats because I live in California and the sun is beating down on my scalp all the time. And then, sometimes I go someplace where it's cold and I need another protective layer for that. And so, I mean, basically I've got three types of hat, where I have like a variety of different baseball caps,
Yep.
A couple of beanies, and then like one bucket hat for dealing with rain.
These
But
are the 3 acceptable hats for a man to wear at this point. That would have been,
yeah.
and bucket hat, 1 bucket hat is the right number, I think, because like if you become bucket hat guy, that really characterizes you, but you're allowed to have 1, I think.
Yeah, and I think it needs to be a functional bucket hat,
Yeah.
Like this is a rain hat. This is not just like an aesthetic bucket hat.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess to answer your question, it's probably just like different varieties of baseball cap. Like maybe my work hat is like I don't know. I've got a hat with the BART logo on it, Bay Area Rapid Transit, that I wear a lot. And
Yeah.
that's kind of related to my work, so maybe that's my work hat.
I like that. I actually can't wear hats, which I have enough hair now that that's okay, but it is increasingly a problem. Like,
What do you mean you can't wear hats? Is this like a medical thing or
I have such a large head. When I go to a place that sells hats, if I go to a haberdasher, to somebody who specifically only sells hats, the experience is I tell them, I would love to have a hat. That would be great. I don't think you make one big enough for me. And then they say, that's impossible. And then they get their biggest hat off the shelf and they put it
Wow.
on my head and it sits on it like a fez.
You're like the Elephant Man.
Yeah, I'm like a 4X or something crazy. Like it is so bad.
So you need like a custom. You need custom hats.
Yes, I have 1 ball cap that I got from my father-in-law for Christmas recently. I actually don't know where it is, but it is from a specific large hat vendor online. That's all they do, and it barely accommodates me.
Yeah. I mean, I think you just need to find someone who, like I don't know if you follow the menswear guy on social media, but he's always talking up like finding a good tailor, supporting local craft businesses. You just need to find someone who can like, I don't know, just repurpose large tote bags and create like custom sized hats just for you.
Garbage pails, industrial buckets, like for mopping, like not a normal bucket. A normal bucket would be too small, but like a special bucket with a purpose. I think that's the scale. So you've put on your casual hanging out bucket hat, and you are reading what these days?
I mean, okay, so actually, before I get to what I'm reading right now, so I listened, as I mentioned before we started recording, I listened to the first couple episodes of this podcast, and you mentioned in the first episode that you had this tab that had been sitting open for the longest time that you had never read, but like someone on Blue Sky posted it and you thought it was interesting, but you just never got around to it, and you finally closed the tab. That was me. I was the one who posted that tab. And
so the tab was the title is like, is matter conscious?
yes. And so I would love to save you having to go back through your history and recover that. I'll just briefly summarize this to you because I think it's super cool.
This is incredible. Please.
Okay, so it was written by this Norwegian philosopher who works on I guess like metaphysics and she's associated with this concept called panpsychism, which is this theory in philosophy that all matter contains some element of consciousness, like some atom of consciousness or something, so to speak. Part of the reason why that theory is really appealing to a lot of people is because it solves the what's called the hard problem of consciousness, which is the idea that like, we're physical entities and we have, physical brains and nerves and everything. But we also have this thing called mind or conscious experience or whatever. And like, what is the actual relationship between those two things? And that's the hard problem of consciousness. Panpsychism solves that by just saying, well, everything is suffused with like a little bit of consciousness. And maybe when you get matter in like these particularly complicated structures, you start to get entities that are recognizably conscious. In this piece, she's arguing, and I thought this was super interesting, that panpsychism also solves the hard problem of matter, which she defines as basically like when we describe matter we're always kind of talking about it in terms of like physical relationships. Like you can describe something by describing its mass or how hard it is, or the texture of it. But these are all basically just ways of describing relationships between different types of matter. And there's not really a language to describe the actual substance of matter. And her argument is, well, what if we said that the substance of matter is basically like this core element of consciousness or whatever it is? So I don't know. I mean, I didn't find it 100% convincing. I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about this stuff, but I thought it was cool and kind of a mind fuck. And also I find panpsychism a very exciting idea, because it feels like if it's right, it can explain a lot of stuff. And it also kind of opens up a lot of new and interesting ways of just kind of thinking about the world around you.
Yeah, I don't read a lot of philosophy for all sorts of reasons. I think the big one being I'm a baby. I just read fiction for the most part. It's an issue, but I'm immediately sympathetic to that idea. I immediately want it to be true, because I do find that, like, for me, the most comforting version of thinking about like what happens when I die is when I think, like, honestly, I don't think anything happens. Like, to me, it seems like maybe apart from the fact that it'll be so insignificant that, like, obviously from everybody else's perspective, nothing has happened. Like, it feels as if I'm barely, like, my insistence on my specialness as a first person narrator of the universe is really the problem there. And the universe will keep doing its thing. And to the extent that I had anything interesting going on, I doubt that's going to stop, because I doubt that it really has that much to do with me as a person who keeps thinking the word I. That is how I feel better about these things. I don't think that that's panpsychism, but it feels similarly like just a little bit hippie.
Yeah, I mean it feels a little bit hippie. It feels maybe like vaguely Buddhist in a way too.
Yeah.
But it's also the thing that's interesting about it is it sounds like that, but then there are also these like very kind of rigorous analytical philosophers who have about as little hippie inclination as you can possibly have, who are working on this issue, and I think making some like pretty interesting arguments, both for and against, I should say.
Are there names you would drop if I were to get over being a huge baby and read something that isn't fiction? Is there somebody you would say I should follow up on for that?
Well, I mean, the author of that essay, and I'm blanking on her name, but it's something very Norwegian. But I think she's written a few things about this. There's also, I mean, honestly, I think just sometimes when I'm just kind of sitting around on my phone or something and I'm trying to avoid looking at social media, I'll just look shit up on Wikipedia. That's just like a way healthier way to waste time on your phone. And I think just going over to the panpsychism Wikipedia page, that's honestly like a great way to get some basic philosophy 101, is just kind of look at how things are summarized on Wikipedia and then look at the sources they cite.
I'm not the first person to make this observation by any means, but it is really wild to me how we went from, like, when I was in college, I remember being very skeptical of Wikipedia. I remember feeling like, well, this is like idiots like me are writing this. Like, how can this possibly be a reliable source? I'm going to do like they tell me in class. I'm going to look up, peer-reviewed journals, and I'm going to dig in and do the work. And like now, Wikipedia is like the most wholesome thing in the world. It's like the only thing that still works on some level.
Yeah, it's the only part of the internet that still feels like the internet I was promised when I was a kid.
Yeah, it is utopian in a way that, like, I was totally a like techno optimist for as long as a person could be. I was so excited about the internet when I got on there when I was like 11 years old. And I still am. Like, I try to imagine when people talk about like going offline, either temporarily just to do some work or long term to regain their sanity. There's always a part of me that's just like, no, I'm never getting offline, because it's the solution to life's problems. Even as I'm like now, like, no, it's a hellscape. Like, I can't really internalize that. I'm so attached to that Wikipedia vision of the possibilities of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think about just by function of my job and the sort of work I do, I feel like I have to live a lot of my life online. And there are upsides and downsides to that. Like obviously we wouldn't be having this conversation if not for online. That's how we know each other. But sometimes I think about people who ascend to the absolute highest echelons of these sort of internet centric professions. Sometimes then just like ascend out of the internet. And the example I think about a lot is Ta-Nehisi Coates, where he transcended the internet and just vanished from the internet and just gets to still writes about current events, still has a lot of projects happening, but is no longer on social media at all. And I look at that and I think, wow, that bastard. Like
Yes.
I would love to get to the point where I could just do that.
Yeah, it's so hard when you write fiction, like, and you get different advice on this because there are people who will say, I didn't sell my book because I didn't have a platform. And like, that is definitely something that people will tell you sometimes. But then there are other people who will say what I think is the truth, which is like, have a platform or don't. It doesn't sell books. Like, it's almost totally irrelevant to moving fiction in particular, and like publishers who you should respect and work with, I think know that. Like that's what I heard when I talked to the actual people who put my last book out. I have this back and forth of like, I have definitely failed to become internet famous, which seemed when I was younger like probably the only way I could break out and ascend, like you're talking about, like the only way I could get to that point where I was writing professionally in a sustainable way. But also, if there's two paths, right? Because what I thought you were maybe going to say when you started that comment was they're the people who are at the top of the internet who then completely lose their minds. Like you have two options. You leave or you go nuts. And those
Yeah.
are the only two ways it can go when you get to a certain point. And I don't know where that point is exactly, but it's not, the number of followers is not as high as you would think, I feel.
Yeah. It's sort of I can't remember what I mean, I don't know why this is the second time in the conversation I'm going to get kind of Buddhist, but I don't remember whether it's like the concept of samsara or whether it's something else, but this idea of the world of suffering and the world of desire and being stuck in that. And it's like you either eventually transcend out of that to a higher plane or I guess in some other versions, you just like kind of are stuck in this endless cycle and maybe you start to go more and more insane. That is a horrible butchering of actual like Buddhist theology or philosophy, but it does feel like there's a little bit of a parallel there where it's like, okay, you're on Blue Sky or on the whatever platform of choice, and you are constantly tormented by both your own desires and just like the utter depravity and cruelty of the world around you. But like maybe you could get to some point where you float beyond that and then you're no longer on Blue Sky at all. Or maybe you become the most on Blue Sky of anyone. You become like Taylor Lorenz or something.
Yeah.
You get terminal posters
Yeah.
madness.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because like the account of life where desire is suffering and you have to escape desire in order to stop suffering, that had like no appeal to me until I was on the internet. And now it does, like on the internet specifically, all you do is feel desire and all it does is hurt most of the time. And yet I love it. I can't let go.
Well, I mean, fortunately, OpenAI is going to start allowing people to generate erotica on there, so that should probably break the cycle of need and unmet desire.
Yes, yes. We'll all just do an out of office email and spend a week just dealing with our desires, and then we'll be, I don't know what we'll be like. It'll be a whole different. It's an apocalyptic vision of the future. Really, the world will end, and then a new world will be born.
Yep. We'll have to have like I guess like a sort of servant cast that just maintains the servers, and then everyone else is just they're just interacting with
Gooning.
their chatbots. Yeah, exactly.
It's frustrating that is actually like genuinely what is supposed to happen according to the people that own this stuff. Like the best version of it is that we're all so wealthy from the benefits of AI that we have like just enough people doing actual jobs to keep the world running. And then the rest of us, like, I don't know, we goon until we die.
Yeah.
So what about fiction?
Let's see. My reading habits are a little bit all over the place. I just finished reading A Bend in the River by V.S. Naipaul, who I had never read before, but had always been kind of on my list as someone who should be read.
Yeah.
And so that was like my last book, and now I'm reading Blind Sight, which is not my typical kind of reading these days, but sounded super interesting, which is more just like really heady kind of mindfuck hard sci-fi, which it's sort of like I don't know. I just picked this book up last night after finishing A Bend in the River, and I guess it's like I felt a little bit of whiplash because it's like you're kind of supposed to relate to those sorts of books in a very different way from how you relate to something like A Bend in the River.
Right. Who wrote Blind Sight? I feel like I've heard the name, but I don't know anything about it.
Peter Watts, who I hadn't heard before. I think he's like a former astrophysicist or something who then became a sci-fi writer. But it's a super interesting book because the sort of continuity maybe it has with A Bend in the River, and this is kind of what I was suggesting when I say like I never read or watch movies or TV to feel good.
Yeah.
It's like they both have kind of I think a very bleak view of humanity and where humanity is headed.
What does it think like what's the premise? Where does it think we're headed?
It's kind of like a First Contact novel. But right now it's just sort of introducing all the different characters, and it's all these characters who are kind of like post-human in various ways that enhance some of their capacities, but it seems like they're also all kind of just broken and a little bit insane because of them. So like, for example, the main character is a guy who's like completely missing one hemisphere of his brain.
Oh.
But he has the ability, I guess, to, you have these sort of sophisticated AIs, and then you have regular people, and he's the one who can somehow communicate with both of them, like actually translate what the sophisticated AI is saying or picking up to regular people. But it also kind of makes him have a little bit of a serial killer personality, I guess, because it's like other people are so strange and like, and then there's another character who's like a literal vampire. I guess like part of the premise of the book is that what became vampires in kind of mythology were actually like a different kind of species of hominid that was like a Stone Age apex predator, and they have successfully Jurassic Parked vampires and brought them into what in the novel is the present day by combining ancient vampire DNA with like the DNA of psychopaths.
Why did they choose psychopaths? I was with you up until that point, and now I don't understand why we're doing this.
I guess the idea is that they were the most genetically similar to vampires.
Sure.
There's also a lot of weird stuff about autism in the book because it's like it's like they're like, I guess the part I left out is like, oh yeah, we included the DNA signatures associated with sociopathy and autism in order to help clone vampires. And so part of me is reading this and being like, I don't know about that one. But
yeah, there's definitely, how to put this? I have a lot of affection and a lot of time for what feels like fundamentally evil fiction. And part of the reason that I like to read things where I'm like, you know what? I feel like I'm okay with this just being wrong and bad in terms of its ideas, in terms of what it's saying about the world, is like, I have a personal feeling that story in general has pretty evil tendencies. Like when I was a kid, one of the things that was hardest for me, like as I'm trying to learn to write, one of the things that I really struggled with is the idea that the story begins when bad things start happening to the main character, right? Like the only reason that a story usually is of interest is that people are suffering. And there's a way in which I feel like just embracing that and exploring ideas that feel perverse in that way is a more natural mode for fiction than the thing that, I mean, like the thing that I do, right? Like I struggle to embody this in my own work. You know, I feel like there is a real sense of maybe we could achieve moral perfection through art, right? Like that is something that it's obviously it's always been around, but I feel like right now it's really hard to mount an argument against it in a way that it hasn't always been. I think partly because a lot of the people that would mount the argument against it are completely insufferable, right? Like the counter arguments tend to be more in the vein of you can't say anything these days.
Right, yeah.
Which is not an interesting idea, but it is an interesting thing, like reading a book and encountering an idea like that where it's like I don't think I would defend this to someone who told me that they thought that it was a bad thing to put in a book. I wouldn't really say that you should do it, but I don't know that I'm going to art for things that I should experience.
Yeah, I mean that was the entire experience of reading A Bend in the River, honestly. And
yes,
I think part of the have you read it?
No, but I have deeply irritating memories of reading. I was too young. I would have been like 20. This is back in college. I read Naipaul Forum, and I'm blanking on what the book was. It wasn't that one. But the thing that was rough about that was that I had to discuss it with other undergraduates. And if you want to kind of like, you know, shake a tree and see like what upsetting ideas fall out, he's a good author for that. Like you learn some things about the people around you when you discuss his books.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of what actually drew me to him is that I remember when he died, I saw so many obituaries or just comments from different people saying things like, "Oh yeah, I mean, his views about all these things were horrible and disgusting, but you can't take away the fact that he was a brilliant writer." And I think in some ways that made him more attractive to me than if people talked about how he was a brilliant writer and he had these great compassionate politics. Because when people say stuff like that, it can be a little bit hard to tell whether they actually mean it about the writing or whether they're complimenting this person mainly because of the good politics. Whereas with
Right.
Naipaul, where people had to almost begrudgingly call him a brilliant writer, it's like, okay, well, I know you're not just saying he's a brilliant writer because he agrees with you. You're saying it despite the fact that you find him despicable. So
You're
that
right.
probably means he actually really is worth reading.
The confession of the enjoyment. Now here's, I mean, this is a thing where like I don't tend to find that kind of statement about a writer especially tempting, because my question is always like, is the writing actually that great, right? Like, I was too young to appreciate it at the time. I don't trust my own memory or assessment of it, like aesthetically or structurally, but like, did that bear out for you that it was worth the upsetting bits to get the, I don't know if it's gorgeous prose or how would you characterize it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was absolutely worth it. And I wouldn't even say it was like worth the upsetting bits in the sense that it's like, oh, well, you kind of have to get over these parts of the books. It's more like it was all just part of the same like aesthetic experience of just an incredibly grim view of humanity and a kind of like grim and sort of tragic understanding of political possibility, which I found unsettling, but also really kind of fascinating. And it's not something I would ever defend. And if someone read it and said, I just find this offensive and despicable, like I wouldn't argue with them about that. I guess I would just say that it's like it did for me what I feel like good fiction and should do, which is it introduced me to a way of understanding the world that, whether I agreed with it or not, felt very like I was in it, and that it also raised questions for me, like whether or not I agreed with it. I found myself kind of arguing with elements in it that I guess I maybe hadn't really thought that deeply about before, but now I had to kind of reckon with.
I have this thing where like I fight with books constantly while I read them.
Hmm.
It's like it's really been a constant struggle for me, just like in reading as much as I want to, because it slows me down so much. Because I will sit there and feel like I don't like the way you did that comma. I would have put the comma here instead of there.
Hmm.
This is amateur hour. I'm furious about this comma placement, and then I move to the next sentence, and it's happening all over again. So like I've had to like really cultivate in myself a willingness not to argue with the book if I possibly can resist it, because I know that the moment's going to come when I can't help it anymore and I'm going to start fighting. But do you have that sort of feeling? Because like you're excited in this case. Like I liked that I had to argue with this book. I liked that I had to deal with the problems that it was putting in front of me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like two different kinds of arguing or fighting, right? Like one of them is sort of on the level of like I'm being put inside of a mind that I find slightly repellent, but also very seductive at the same time. But the reason why Naipaul is able to cast that spell is because I'm not arguing with him about commas. Like I trust
Right.
I trust his instincts. Like he has such perfect control over his prose at the sentence level. And that's part of what makes the book feel genuinely dangerous. And I mean dangerous in both like a complimentary way and also a kind of, oh, like politically some of the ideas in here are genuinely toxic.
Yeah. Is there someone that for you is fun because you find yourself nodding the whole time? Like, is there someone that you really enjoy just agreeing with for the course of the whole book? I'm asking this. I'm feeling like when I ask a question like that, I feel like I should also have an answer, and I'm feeling like I don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure that I have that person. But is there somebody like that for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like there are books that I love that do really closely reflect my worldview and
Yeah.
that are kind of and have also probably helped shape my worldview through reading them. And I don't know if it's like the pleasure comes from agreeing with the author so much as it just comes from like, I don't know, like a feeling of recognition, like a mind that works the same way that yours does. I mean, for me, a good example of that is John le Carré, where I feel like the way he kind of like, to me, George Smiley is one of the greatest literary heroes of all time, and I think part of the reason why is because the sort of virtues of George Smiley as a character are the things that I find really, really important. Like like this kind of like sense of duty he has. And there's this line from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy where he's talking about the difference between him and this kind of like Soviet spy Carla. And he's just sort of talking about how, his liberalism might be flabby and decadent, but he'll still take it over this, like totalitarian fanaticism. And it just really hits, especially right now for obvious reasons.
I love those books. I mean, I have an experience with them where I often feel like I missed something important. I often feel like I'm not keeping up with them that well. Like there's some aspect of the plot that I'm not following that I am in some sense responsible for as a reader. But it kind of doesn't matter because the vibes are good enough, the sentences are good enough and the characters are good enough that I'm like, well, when we get to the end, I'll find out more or less what was going on. And
Yeah.
well,
Well, it's kind of beside the point, right? Like, I mean, part of what I love about those books is that I do really like the kind of general atmosphere of that kind of that sort of spy fiction. in the same way that I really like the general atmosphere of certain types of crime fiction, like Tana French or something. But in both cases, it's like that sort of atmosphere is the setting to explore certain personality types, right? And so you don't need to actually be able to perfectly follow the plot. You just need to be able to kind of understand what the characters are doing and why.
Yeah, like scene by scene, you basically know what's happening, even if you don't quite know what it adds up to. You know what you need to know dramatically to appreciate the choices the character is making in that moment. And that, I mean, that really is that's something that I often I this is a podcast about shame. Another cause of shame that I experience often when I'm reading is that sense of like, do I actually have a command of like everything that's happened so far in this book? Or am I just looking at the page that's in front of me and experiencing it and kind of trusting that there is that continuity? Like, how well have I been keeping track of this? But, I mean, that's also kind of how it feels just generally to be alive. Like, I don't feel like I usually have a great grasp on what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like if you trust the writer, then it's like the writer's telling you what's important, and the stuff that has receded in the background has maybe receded into the background for a reason. Like there's this great anecdote about Raymond Chandler after he wrote I think it was The Big Sleep.
Yeah, I think that's the one that famously no one knows what the fuck happened.
Right, exactly. And someone I think like the chauffeur gets murdered at some point in The Big Sleep, and someone asked Raymond Chandler after reading the book, like, so wait a minute, who murdered the chauffeur? And Chandler's response was, "Oh, I forgot about the chauffeur."
Yeah. Yes. And that, like, as a writer of fiction, that is so true. Like, I have genuinely changed characters' names and like important characters midway through a book by mistake. Like in my first book that was published, I swapped the names of two main. They were pseudonyms. They were not their real names, which is what made this possible. But I did refer to them by those names for most of the book, and I did halfway through switch them to the other character and not notice. And one of them was named John, and one of them was named Matthew. And so there was a moment that involved the toilet, which I referred to as the John. So I did a Control F to fix this mistake when I realized that I'd gotten the characters confused. And so there was a moment where a character hid the gun in the Matthew. And that did not make it to print.
Okay.
but it did make it to my my MFA capstone workshop. They're like, "Did you know that he hides the gun in the Matthew?" I was like, "Oh yeah." I see how that happened.
Yeah.
It really is. It is all, even when you're the person writing it. And I do think that I have a worse case of this than a lot of people. I have a kind of fundamental absent-mindedness about some of the issues of plot, but it's as pretend for you as it is for the people reading it.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I guess there are some writers who avoid that by just kind of rigorously outlining and, having just post-it notes everywhere. But I don't know. It seems like you're kind of lose something. When I mean, everyone has their own process, whatever. But I mean, for me, when I've tried to write like that, I sometimes feel like I lose the sense of play because I lose the ability to surprise myself when I try doing it like that.
Yeah. I when I went to South Korea, I spent a fair amount of time hanging out with a guy who writes fiction and like especially writes like thrillers and has written like some TV and things like that. And he was a fair bit younger than me, but he had a lot of good advice. And a big part of his good advice was like, he was so horrified by the idea that I am a person who doesn't outline. He was like, "Mike, you've got to outline. You've got to start doing this. How long did it take you to write your last book? Are you kidding? You could have written like 10 books in that time. You gotta go in with a plan." And I was promising him, I was like, with the next one, I really want to do it. I want this to be the one where I make it happen. And no book has ever survived me trying to outline it. It's never, I've already given up on that one. And like the next two that I tried to outline, I can't do it.
Because if you outline it enough, then at some point it's like, okay, well, what else is there to say? Like, what's the point of writing it at this point? I have everything that's supposed to go in it.
Right. Well, like I feel like the brain that I use to like think of things at that level of abstraction is not a very smart brain.
Mm.
Like the brain that thinks in like terms of scenes and dialogue, that guy's okay. The guy who is able to, make note cards that say and then character X encounters character Y and this thing happens as a result. That guy seems to be an idiot, and I've tried to rely on him, and he's never come through for me. So I'm kind of done with him.
Mm-hmm.
I want to check in on the book that I talked about a little bit in the last episode that you haven't heard because it isn't out yet, called The Faun by Magda Szabo. Do you know Magda Szabo at all?
No.
She is a Hungarian writer who is I think she is most famous for writing a book called Abigail that is, do you know that one?
Yeah. So that is a book that I visit New York like a couple times a year or something. And I was at McNally Jackson, which is a great bookstore there. And one of the staffers had like a strong recommendation for that book. And so I bought it, and it's been 5 years and I still haven't read it. And every time I look at it, I feel bad.
It is a good book. It is also for children. And I did not know that when I picked it up. I first encountered her writing through a book called The Door, which is very, very much for adults. And I try lately I've been enjoying like not learning anything about a book before I start reading it. Like if I have any inkling that I'll be into it, I try to just go in totally blind, not because I'm like anxious about spoilers, but because there's a real thrill in that like encounter that could be like anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of heartbreaking to slowly piece together that this was written with a, like 14, 12-year-old reader in mind who like, it lacked the complexity of her work generally, which is like very morally difficult and strange and disorienting. Like it was pedagogical.
Mm-hmm.
It taught me how to think about a certain point in history, a certain place, and about like how you should treat other people. So it is good, but that's like maybe you save that up until you're reading to your daughter when she's like just old enough to listen to you for that long.
Okay.
But so I've been reading a book by her called The Faun.
Mm-hmm.
And when I checked in on it last, I was experiencing some real anxiety and trying to summarize it because it is it's a really slippery book. It is written from the perspective of it's an actress of note in Hungary, like I think just a little bit post-war, who is writing. It's taking the form of sort of a letter to a man with whom she has a relationship that I kept feeling like, am I missing the part where I knew what the relationship is? Mm-hmm. Did you tell me, like, I think you're married? It feels like you must be. There's some kind of domestic details. And so she's slipping backward in time and talking about her childhood, and she'll move forward a little bit. And then she'll talk about like things that they did together recently. And she'll talk about things that are happening like in the present moment of the story. And so because it has like all this context of her relationship to this character that is, he knows what his relationship to her is. That's why she hasn't told me, mm-hmm. is that she doesn't have to tell him that. I've worked out finally that, well, I worked out. She finally told me that she is, the other woman, so to speak, in an affair with this guy. And I have some suspicions as I move into the third act about why he's in the hospital. But that hasn't been confirmed yet. But the thing that I've been thinking about as I read it is that richness that comes from all the different pressures on this book, because it is the narration is pressured by, this is a character who is evasive, who doesn't want to explain herself very clearly, except when she does, right? She's ashamed of a lot of things in her life, and so she keeps a lot of it really elliptical. And there's the pressure of she is communicating with this person who she hates and loves, who I increasingly suspect is not going to read it. I increasingly suspect he's dead or he's going to die soon. Mm. But so she's writing for his eyes. There's the pressure of a very fraught moment in Hungarian history, which like the next thing I read needs to be like the history of Hungary, because I've been enjoying some Hungarian authors, and I feel like increasingly aware of the context that I don't have. And there's the pressure of that context, right? There's the pressure of all the experiences that the reader that she's writing for in that moment. Like, she barely has to use a word for the person that is her audience to remember like 12 years of the most intense experiences a person can have. They're like, ah, yes, of course.
Right.
You don't have to tell me that. It's all I can think about. I'm actually desperate to stop thinking about that right now. And I was thinking about this partly in terms of, I don't know if you have ever, I don't know where he said this, but there's at least like one essay where Vonnegut says that the way to write a good book is to choose a person who you are writing it for and to think of them while you write it. And I think that the reason that works is that it brings that pressure to the narration. It makes you make choices, right? Because it's no longer like, what would describe this fictional scene accurately? It's what would describe this fictional scene accurately that would make Ned happy. Like, what would make it so Ned understood what I'm trying to say and would have a good time with it, would make him sad, would make him have the experience that I'm looking for. And so like that's kind of the model that I'm using as I think about this book and as I decide how much I love it, because I think I do. I loved The Door. The Door was like one of the best books I read in the last decade. I don't know.
Wow.
And it took me by surprise. I didn't know anything about it going in. And this one is really different, but I'm really enjoying feeling all those different pressures bearing down on the prose and making the choices specific and making it shaped differently from anything that I've read. So I'm really into it. I do recommend it, although I recommend The Door more.
Okay.
Because it doesn't have that. It is not nearly so slippery. It is much easier to get on the wavelength of the characters and understand like what the actual dramatic situation is. Whereas this one, I still don't think I know the premise. If I'm being honest, I don't think I know what the setup for the book is. I think I'm going to find out in like 20 pages.
Yeah. How do you feel about twists like that, where it's sort of like it's something that the sort of point of view character knows, but that is being concealed from you, the reader? Because I feel like I'm usually annoyed when that comes up, but I think I do feel like there are probably contexts in which it is really effective.
Well, I think that like the dynamic I was just describing kind of differentiates the version of it that works for me from the version of it that doesn't. Like, the thing that sucks is when you get to the end of the story and you see the twist and you look back at everything you read and you don't feel as if that was informing what was happening up to that point, like except in like showy ways where like it's designed like, you thought that this was happening, like, in The Sixth Sense where like, oh yeah, they never talked to him. Like there's that, but like if you feel the pressures of that twist more subtly and it allows you to kind of think back, and it doesn't replace your interpretation of the story. It doesn't replace what you've read, but it instead enriches it. And it gives you context for something you already enjoyed. Like, I think that's the really important thing, is you have to enjoy it all the way up to the twist. The twist can't save it.
Yeah. I think there's a really, really difficult kind of tightroke there, though. Because, like, I mean, a book that I was actually reading at the hospital when my wife was kind of in the early stages of labor, The Impusium by Olga, I think her last name is pronounced Tokarczuk, the recent Polish Nobel Prize winner. It's a great book. It's kind of like a really kind of fun riff on the Magic Mountain, and sort of like like a feminist riff on the Magic Mountain kind of sounds like I don't know. At this point, it kind of sounds like an annoying literary cliche at this, but I think she does it incredibly well, and it's a very smart and interesting and also just very kind of spooky book in a fun way. But I was reading it, and I don't know, maybe 50 pages in, I'm like, oh, the main character is intersex. And then that's never spelled out, and then it's kind of the twist at the very end of the book. But and so, on the one hand, it's like you need to provide enough so that if it's thematically important, then it needs to be thematically important throughout the entire book.
Right.
But then it's, at some point I'm just sitting there reading it and thinking like, just say that he's intersex. Everyone knows that he's intersex.
Yeah, for me, like the counter example, the like really bad version, I didn't read the book. I have not read Fight Club, but I saw Fight Club. And for me, Fight Club is an example of the worst sin you can commit in doing a twist, which is that it replaces the story that I had basically been enjoying up to that point with a much stupider version of itself, because no longer can you enjoy the like social interactions between these two characters that were like, kind of interesting and frictive. Now you got to think about this idiot fighting himself in the parking lot. And and when you go back and watch it knowing the twist, I don't think most of the scenes make any fucking sense. Like, I don't think most of what happens in that movie can happen in the way that it is depicted if you subtract one of the people from the scenes. So like for me, that's I think the best twists usually are things where like you actually pretty much know them like you're describing, but it enriches your experience rather than feeling like, could you please just say it?
Yeah.
I want to have a productive revision and a productive conversation with myself when I get to the twist that makes me feel like I enjoyed my experience as I was getting there, and now I'm enjoying my experience thinking back over it rather than just like, and now there's a dumb version.
Yeah. I mean, I think going back to just how much we both love Le Carré, I think Tinker Tailor is a perfect example of this, where Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is actually a better book the second time you read it knowing the twist. Because once you know the twist, that kind of like sense of inevitability and the sense that like deep down everyone kind of knows it but are lying to themselves about it, I think really enriches the story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you want. That's what you want, is for that to be something that only makes it grow rather than like shrinking it down. But I think one of the other things that like really sucks about a bad twist is that it does get to the point where you could just say it to a person and it reduces the book to that, right? Like you don't even have to read it now because I've told you the thing that it was all building towards. So don't waste your time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A book that's just sort of like I don't know. That's basically like a game of Wordle, where it's like once you know the word, there's no reason to keep playing. That's just that's just like a crappy, deflating reading experience.
Yeah. Well, I'm like, another one of those like rules that I have for myself when I'm like trying to decide whether something is a good idea in like even in genre fiction where this doesn't seem like it should be the rule, but I think it is like, how does this fictional representation of maybe something totally spectacular and unreal correlate to anything that I've experienced in real life? And twists don't correlate to anything that I've ever experienced in real life. Like there's never a moment where you learn something that recontextualizes everything that's happened for you in the last 10 years in a way that makes it like totally trivial. And like, well, now I know this, and all those other experiences I had, they aren't interesting anymore because I know the truth. Mm-hmm. Like usually stuff just gets more interesting when you learn more about what was going on. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think that's kind of a general rule.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think it does apply to genre fiction. I think sometimes where I can struggle with sci-fi and fantasy a little bit is like I do have this sort of like bone deep sense that functionally the same set of aesthetic criteria apply across literature. Like it needs to be recognizably about people in a way that feels, emotionally gripping, and like you're kind of being carried along by this particular worldview. And I feel like, I don't know, sometimes when I read books that I think come out of a particular like dedicated subculture that I'm not a part of, I feel like, oh, this is being evaluated on completely different aesthetic criteria by the people who enjoy it, which is fine. But it's like it creates a sense of I don't know, almost like alienation when I'm reading it.
Yeah, it's both valid for somebody to say this is not really for you, and it's valid for you to say well, this isn't really for me.
Yeah.
Like I feel like in a lot of cases like that, I just feel a strong sense of agreement. You know, like I kind of shake hands with the book. Like, you're right, we're not meant to be.
Yeah.
I've taken up a fair amount of your time, and I appreciate you talking with me about all this stuff. I'm trying to think. Oh, I had a whole. We'll have to some other time if you want to come back. I think about this for the future, because I had a fun idea that we do not have time to do now, which is I traditionally like to ask people if they did earn a personal pan pizza through a summer reading program. Have you?
I don't remember. I was trying to think about that because
Oh,
I
man.
figured this would come up. And I know that we had some sort of reading challenge at my local public library growing up, but I don't remember really what my level of engagement with it was or what the prizes were. I will say, though, shout out to the Russell Library in Middletown, Connecticut. Great, great public library. Has just like set the standard for what I always look for in a library now.
So the game we're not going to play now, but this will be a fun thing for you to think about. Maybe is as a public policy consultant, as a professional in the field of providing people incentives to do things that are good for them. How would you design a modern summer reading program?
Oh man. Yeah, I gotta think about that one.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the right answer. And it's, I mean, partly because, again, like I haven't really known a young kid in a personal way in a long time, right? Like I don't have nieces and nephews that I'm seeing constantly. The ones that I see are on like a time warp where I see them once a year for like major holidays, and like they get really tall and they get even taller. So I don't feel like I know what is necessary, like what is lacking and what would work well for maybe the summer program that I grew up with works great still.
Yeah.
But I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, my gut is telling me that the real thing to target isn't necessarily prizes, but social pressure. Like you want to create an environment where reading is the thing people do, and that if you want to be cool, if you want to like hang out with your friends and talk about something, it's books. And like somehow we just gotta, I don't know, we have to use public policy to make reading cool again somehow.
There's nothing cooler than public policy, and
Yeah.
there's nothing it's better at than imparting coolness.
Yeah, no, we'll just instead of library pizza, it'll be like library tax credits.
Or hats. I think maybe we kill three birds with this stone, and we also bring back hats for people. We reward them with hats, and we tell them that the hats are cool.
Yeah.
And we see if we can get like the pork pie and the fedora. The poor fedora, which never did anything wrong, but is now
if you read enough books this summer, then you can wear a fedora and no one can say shit to you.
Yes, it's got a little feather in it that means I read 1,000 books, so leave me alone.
Yeah.
I think that actually we've done it. I didn't think we had time. I think that is a perfect solution.
All right, great.
Traditionally, we end an episode by thanking my cat Tony. He's contributed less to this episode than ever before. I haven't even seen him today, I don't think. And yet still I feel obligated to say thank you, Tony.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. And thank you to my cat, Herbie, who has also contributed absolutely nothing and yet nonetheless gets a lot of rewards and affection for doing nothing with his life.
Thank you, Herbie.
Thank you, Tony.